Move to the back!
Listen here, little ghetto princess. This seat costs more than your entire wardrobe. Move to the back where you belong before I have security drag you out. The words sliced through the hushed luxury of first class like a blade through silk. Victoria Hammond's voice carried the entitled confidence of someone who had never been told, no, never been challenged, never been wrong. She sat perched in Suite 1A of SkyLink Airways flight. 447, her platinum blonde hair shellacked into perfect submission, her Hermes scarf draped with calculated precision over a cream-colored Chanel jacket that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her icy blue eyes burned with the kind of hatred that money couldn't buy, but privilege certainly could nurture. Standing in the aisle, holding a boarding pass and a quiet dignity that spoke volumes, was Maya Rodriguez. 24 years old, African-American, wearing a faded gray hoodie, dark jeans, and worn sneakers that had seen better days. Her curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her only jewelry a plain silver watch. She looked like a college student heading home for the holidays, maybe a young professional flying on a company discount. She certainly didn't look like someone who belonged in a suite that cost $12,000. What Victoria Hammond didn't know, what the flight crew hovering nearby didn't know, what the other first-class passengers craning their necks to watch the drama unfold didn't know, was that the young woman standing calmly in front of the seat 1A owned the entire airline. In exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, Maya Rodriguez would make a phone call that would destroy Victoria's life and multiple careers, and send shockwaves through the entire aviation industry. Before we dive into this incredible true story of arrogance meeting consequence, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love connecting with viewers from around the world, and something tells me this story is going to resonate no matter where you are. And while you're down there, if you believe that everyone deserves respect, regardless of how they look or dress, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, what you're about to witness will change how you think about power, prejudice, and justice forever. Now, let's rewind 30 minutes to understand how we got to this explosive moment. The rain was hammering the windows of JFK Terminal 4 with the kind of intensity that made even seasoned New Yorkers pause and shake their heads. Flight delays were cascading through the departure boards like dominoes, and the exclusive SkyLink Premium Lounge was packed with frustrated high-status passengers nursing expensive cocktails and checking their phones every 30 seconds. Maya Rodriguez sat in a corner booth, her laptop open, but ignored watching the chaos with the kind of detached interest that comes from knowing you can fix problems most people can't even imagine. 3 months ago, her company Aurora Holdings had quietly acquired SkyLink Airways in a deal that hadn't made headlines because Maya preferred to work in shadows. At 24, she was already worth over $12 billion, the founder and CEO of Aurora Tech, a company that had revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure for major airlines. The acquisition of SkyLink was supposed to be her entry into the physical aviation world, a vertical integration that would make Aurora Holdings one of the most powerful transportation companies in America. But Maya hadn't bought SkyLink for money or power. She'd bought it because of stories. Stories that had been flooding her personal email for months, sent by passengers who had nowhere else to turn. Stories of discrimination, humiliation, and casual cruelty that happened somewhere above the clouds where witnesses were trapped and cell phone coverage was spotty. Stories that sounded all too familiar to a young black woman who had built her empire while being consistently underestimated, dismissed, and disrespected by people who looked at her skin color and her age, and decided she couldn't possibly be worth their time. Today was supposed to be a test flight. Maya had booked herself into Suite 1A under her real name, but dressed like any other young traveler. No entourage, no designer clothes, no obvious signs of wealth or status. She wanted to experience SkyLink's customer service the way any young black woman would experience it. She suspected she already knew what she would find, but she needed to see it with her own eyes. She needed documented proof of what she feared was happening routinely to passengers who looked like her. Maya closed her laptop, shouldered her worn leather backpack that had been with her since her MIT days, and headed for Gate A7. The boarding announcement for first-class passengers echoed through the terminal, barely audible over the storm outside. As she walked through the jet bridge, her phone buzzed with a text from Elena Santiago, her chief operating officer and closest friend since college. "Good luck on your test flight, boss. Try not to buy any more airlines while you're up there." Amaya smiled and typed back, "No promises. This industry needs a wake-up call." She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The Boeing 787 was a beauty, Maya had to admit. State-of-the-art entertainment system, spacious cabins, and first-class suites that were essentially private rooms with sliding doors and flatbed configurations. SkyLink had spared no expense in creating a luxury experience for their premium passengers. As Maya made her way down the aisle toward 1A, she nodded politely to the flight attendants, noting their professional smiles and crisp uniforms. Everything looked perfect on the surface. Suite 1A was at the very front of the cabin, offering maximum privacy and space. Maya slid her boarding pass through the electronic reader on the suite door and stepped inside, placing her backpack in the overhead compartment and settling into the leather seat that probably cost more than her first car. She pulled out her phone connected to the aircraft's Wi-Fi and sent a quick message to Elena. "Boarded, Suite 1A secured. Customer service test officially begins now." She had no way of knowing that her test was about to become a trial by fire. The problems began before Maya had even buckled her seatbelt. She heard the commotion 3 rows behind her before she saw it. Raised voices, the shuffle of expensive luggage being dragged down the narrow aisle, and the kind of imperious tone that suggested someone was very unhappy and very accustomed to having their unhappiness immediately addressed. Excuse me, this is completely unacceptable. I specifically requested Suite 1A when I booked this flight 6 months ago. I am a Diamond Elite member, and I expect to be treated as such." Maya glanced over her shoulder and saw a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a country club catalog. Late 50s, perfectly coiffed, blonde hair designer, everything from her crocodile leather handbag to her Italian leather boots. She was speaking to Carlos Martinez, the lead flight attendant, with the kind of dismissive authority that suggested she had never met a service industry employee who couldn't be bullied into submission. "Mrs. Hammond." "I completely understand your frustration," Carlos was saying, his voice strained with professional politeness. "But according to our computer records, Suite 1A is occupied by a passenger who checked in earlier. Perhaps I could interest you in Suite 1B. It has the exact same amenities. I don't want 1B. I want 1A. I always sit in 1A. Do you understand what Diamond Elite status means? It means I get what I want when I want it, without having to explain myself to flight attendants who make less in a year than I spend on handbags." Maya felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had heard that tone before, had been on the receiving end of that casual cruelty more times than she cared to remember. The assumption that status equaled superiority, that money granted the right to treat other human beings as obstacles to be moved or problems to be solved. She considered intervening, offering to switch seats to diffuse the situation, but something held her back. Call it intuition, call it experience, but Maya had a feeling this was about to become exactly the kind of test she had come here to conduct. Carlos glanced toward Suite 1A, clearly weighing his options. Maya could see the calculation in his eyes. One passenger was already seated and settled. The other was standing in the aisle, making demands and causing a scene. The path of least resistance was obvious. "Ma'am," Carlos said to Maya, appearing at her suite door with an apologetic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm terribly sorry, but we have a situation. It appears there may have been an error in our booking computer. Mrs. Hammond is one of our most valued passengers, and she specifically requested this suite. I was wondering if you might be willing to move to Suite 1B as a courtesy." Maya looked up from her phone, meeting Carlos's gaze steadily. "I booked this seat 3 weeks ago and checked in online 12 hours ago. There's no error in your computer." Carlos's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, but sometimes these technical glitches happen, and are you asking me to give up my assigned seat?" Maya's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "The seat I paid for, I'm simply asking if you'd be willing to help us resolve this situation amicably, by giving a demanding passenger what she wants at my expense." Before Carlos could answer, Victoria Hammond appeared behind him, having clearly grown tired of waiting for her problem to be solved. She looked down at Maya with the kind of expression someone might wear while discovering something unpleasant on the bottom of their shoe. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Victoria said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is ridiculous. Obviously there's been some kind of mistake. People like you don't sit in seats like this. Check her ticket. I guarantee it's fraudulent, or she's using some kind of discount that doesn't apply to premium suites." Maya felt the temperature in her body drop 10 degrees. "People like me," Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Don't play innocent. You know exactly what I mean. This suite costs $12,000. Look at you, you're wearing a hoodie and sneakers. You probably saved up for months just to afford a basic economy ticket, and now you're trying to scam your way into first class. It's pathetic, really." The cabin had gone dead silent. Every passenger in first class was now openly staring their conversations forgotten in favor of the drama unfolding in the front row. Maya could feel their eyes on her, some curious, some uncomfortable, a few clearly enjoying the spectacle. Carlos shifted nervously. "Mrs. Hammond, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss privately," Victoria snapped. "This girl is obviously in the wrong seat, probably with a fake ticket, and I want her removed immediately. I have a very important business meeting in London, and I refuse to be delayed because you can't handle basic security procedures." Maya stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. At 5'6", she wasn't particularly tall, but something about her posture, the straightness of her spine, the steadiness of her gaze commanded attention. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried throughout the cabin. "Mrs. Hammond, you've made several assumptions about me in the last 60 seconds. You've assumed I can't afford to sit here. You've assumed my ticket is fraudulent. You've assumed I'm trying to scam my way into a seat I didn't pay for. All of those assumptions are based on how I look, how I dress, and let's be honest, the color of my skin." Victoria's face flushed red. "How dare you try to make this about race? This is about following proper procedures and respecting the hierarchy of passenger status. I am a Diamond Elite member. I have been flying with this airline for 15 years. I know how things work. And how do things work exactly? They work by merit and loyalty, not by playing victim and throwing around accusations of racism every time someone calls out obvious fraud." Maya pulled out her phone and opened her boarding pass app. The screen clearly showed Rodriguez Maya. "Seat 1A, first class suite, paid in full. This is my boarding pass. This is my seat. I paid for it with my own money from my own account. Now, Mrs. Hammond, would you like to show me your boarding pass?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't need to prove anything to you. Carlos, are you going to handle this, or do I need to speak to your supervisor?" Carlos looked like he wanted to disappear into the aircraft's ventilation system. Maya could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that was spiraling rapidly out of control. She also saw the exact moment he made his choice. "Miss," he said to Maya, his tone shifting from apologetic to authoritative, "I'm going to need you to cooperate here. Mrs. Hammond is one of our most valued customers, and I'm what a less valued customer. I didn't say that. But that's what you're implying. You want me to give up my seat to make a demanding passenger happy, despite the fact that I have a valid ticket, and she hasn't shown you hers." Victoria laughed, a harsh sound that carried more than a hint of hysteria. "Valid ticket, please. You probably bought that off some discount website, or you're using stolen credit card information. People like you always have some scam going." The phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud. People like you. Maya had heard it 1,000 times in 1,000 different contexts, always delivered with the same mixture of disgust and superiority. She felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Getting emotional now would only confirm every stereotype Victoria Hammond clearly believed about her. What Victoria and Carlos hadn't noticed in their focus on humiliating Maya was that they had attracted an audience far beyond the first-class cabin. Tyler Brooks, a 26-year-old travel influencer sitting in Suite 2A, had been idly scrolling through his phone when the commotion started. With over 200,000 followers across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, Tyler had an eye for content that would resonate with his audience, and this was pure gold. "Holy shit," Tyler whispered to himself, immediately opening his TikTok app and hitting the live button. "Guys, you're not going to believe what I'm witnessing right now. I'm on SkyLink Flight 447, and there is some serious drama happening in first class." The viewer count started climbing immediately. 50 viewers, 100, 250. Tyler positioned his phone so the camera could capture the confrontation while he provided whispered commentary. "Okay, so there's this young black woman in Suite 1. Hey, she looks super calm and professional, and this older white woman is literally demanding that she give up her seat. Like, actually demanding it. The flight attendant is taking the white woman's side even though the black woman has shown her boarding pass. This is insane." Comments started flooding in. "Is this really happening in 2024? Get their faces on camera. This is discrimination record everything. Someone call the CEO." In Suite 1, B. Sarah Kim, a 31-year-old marketing executive for a major consulting firm, was supposed to be reviewing client presentations for her London meetings. Instead, she found herself transfixed by the scene unfolding next to her. As someone who had built her career fighting for diversity and inclusion in corporate America, Sarah recognized discrimination when she saw it. She pulled out her phone and opened LinkedIn Live. "Hi everyone, this is Sarah Kim, and I'm broadcasting from SkyLink Flight 447, where I'm witnessing something that I honestly can't believe is happening. A young black passenger is being asked to give up her paid seat to accommodate a white passenger who's making demands based on her status. The flight crew is supporting the discrimination." Sarah's LinkedIn network was robust, over 15,000 connections across multiple industries. Within minutes, her live stream had hundreds of viewers, and the comments were pouring in from executives, HR professionals, and diversity advocates. Meanwhile, in Suite 2B, Roberto Vega, a 29-year-old investigative journalist for the Miami Herald, was already typing furiously on his phone. Roberto specialized in transportation industry stories, and his instincts were screaming that this was more than just a passenger dispute. He opened Twitter and began a thread currently on SkyLink Air Flight 447, witnessing what appears to be racial discrimination in first class. Young black woman with valid boarding pass being asked to give up Suite 1A to white passenger who claims status privilege. Flight crew supporting discriminatory request. 1/Roberto's followers included other journalists, civil rights advocates, and industry insiders. His first tweet was retweeted within seconds, and replies started flowing and asking for more details, photos, and video evidence. But it was Maria Santos, a 67-year-old retired teacher sitting in Suite 3A, who provided the most powerful witness testimony. Maria had lived through the civil rights movement, had marched with Dr. King, had seen the ugly face of discrimination in all its forms. She had been quietly reading a book when the confrontation started, but Victoria's increasingly racist language had pulled her attention away from the pages. "Excuse me," Maria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years managing unruly teenagers. "I couldn't help but overhear this conversation, and I have to say what I'm witnessing is absolutely disgraceful." Victoria whirled around, clearly not expecting to be challenged by another passenger. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am." "Discrimination concerns everyone," Maria replied calmly. "I've been watching this entire exchange, and this young woman has done nothing but respond politely to your demands and accusations. She's shown her valid boarding pass, she's remained calm despite your increasingly hostile language, and she's asked reasonable questions about why she should give up a seat she paid for." "She's obviously using a fraudulent ticket," Victoria insisted. "Look at her. Does she look like someone who can afford to sit here?" "She looks like a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity," Maria said. "And frankly, you look like someone who thinks money grants permission to be cruel." Tyler, still live streaming, turned his camera toward Maria. And we've got backup guys. This older lady is not having any of this discrimination. The comments are going crazy. We're up to over 1,000 viewers now. The social media storm was building rapidly. #SkyLink shame began trending on Twitter as Roberto's thread gained momentum. Tyler's TikTok live stream had reached 2,000 viewers, and the comments were a mix of outrage support for Maya and calls for corporate accountability. Sarah's LinkedIn post was being shared by executives from major companies, spreading the story into professional networks across the country. But Maya remained focused on the immediate situation. She could see that Carlos was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the public nature of the dispute, and Victoria was becoming more agitated as she realized she had lost control of the narrative. It was time to escalate. Mrs. Hammond, Maya said, her voice still calm but with an edge that cut through the cabin noise. You've now accused me of fraud, theft, and scamming. You've made assumptions about my financial status based on my appearance. You've demanded that I give up my seat based on your self-proclaimed superiority. The flight crew has supported your discriminatory requests without checking your claims or credentials. I need you to understand something very clearly. What Victoria snapped, her composure finally cracking. This conversation is being recorded by multiple passengers. It's being live-streamed on social media. It's being shared across professional networks. In about 10 minutes, thousands of people are going to know exactly who you are and exactly what you've said. Are you sure you want to continue down this path? Victoria's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She looked around the cabin for the first time and saw the phones pointed in her direction, the faces of other passengers watching with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination. For a moment, Maya thought she might apologize, might recognize that she had gone too far. Instead, Victoria doubled down. You're threatening me now, Carlos. Did you hear that? She's threatening me. I want her arrested for harassment and intimidation. I want her removed from this aircraft immediately. Maya looked at Carlos, whose face had gone ashen. She could see him calculating the risks, weighing the potential consequences of his next decision. She already knew what he was going to choose. Men like Carlos always chose the path of least resistance, even when that path led straight through someone else's dignity. Ma'am, Carlos said to Maya, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and move to a different seat. This situation has become disruptive to other passengers, and I'm not moving, Maya said quietly. The cabin went dead silent. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft system seemed to pause in anticipation. I'm sorry, Carlos said. I said I'm not moving. This is my seat. I paid for it. I've done nothing wrong, broken no rules, and caused no disruption. Mrs. Hammond created this situation with her demands and accusations. If you want to remove someone for being disruptive, I suggest you start with her. Victoria shrieked. How dare you, Carlos, call security, call the captain. I will not tolerate this kind of behavior. And that's when Maya Rodriguez smiled for the first time since boarding the aircraft. It wasn't a warm smile or a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just realized they were about to win a game their opponents didn't even know they were playing. You know what, Mrs. Hammond, that's an excellent idea. Let's call the captain. Let's get security involved. Let's make this official. Maya pulled out her phone and Tyler, still live streaming, zoomed in as she scrolled through her contacts. Who is she calling? Someone whispered. This is about to get interesting, Tyler said to his camera, the viewer count now climbing past 3,000. Guys, I have no idea what's about to happen, but I have a feeling this story is just getting started. Carlos Martinez had been a flight attendant for 12 years. He had handled drunk passengers, unruly children, medical emergencies, and even a few attempted hijackings. He thought he had seen it all. But as he watched Maya Rodriguez calmly scrolling through her phone, he felt a growing sense of unease that he couldn't quite explain. There was something about her composure, her confidence, the way she seemed completely unintimidated by the chaos swirling around her that suggested she wasn't just another passenger with an attitude. But Carlos also knew the unwritten rules of airline customer service: keep the high-status passengers happy, avoid scenes that could go viral, and when in doubt, defer to whoever made the most noise. Victoria Hammond was making a lot of noise. and her Diamond Elite status meant she flew SkyLink at least twice a month, generating tens of thousands of dollars in annual revenue. The girl in the hoodie, regardless of whether she had a valid ticket for Suite 1A, was clearly a one-time customer at best. "Ma'am?" Carlos said to Maya, his tone shifting from apologetic to authoritative. "I need you to cooperate here. You're causing a disturbance, and if you don't comply with crew instructions, I'll have no choice but to involve security. I'm causing a disturbance." Maya looked up from her phone, eyebrows raised. "I'm sitting quietly in my assigned seat. Mrs. Hammond is the one screaming and making demands. Mrs. Hammond has a legitimate concern about her seating assignment, based on what she hasn't shown you her boarding pass. She hasn't provided any evidence that she has a claim to this seat. She simply demanded it based on her status and her assumption that I don't belong here." Victoria, who had been growing increasingly agitated during this exchange, stepped forward again. "I shouldn't have to prove anything to her or to you. I'm Victoria Hammond. My husband is Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Logistics. Do you have any idea how much money we spend with this airline every year?" Maya's expression didn't change. "I'm familiar with Sterling Logistics. Privately held company, about $800 million in annual revenue, primarily focused on East Coast distribution networks. A decent company, though. I understand they've been struggling with digital transformation." Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting a young woman in a hoodie to be familiar with her husband's business. "How do you—" "I pay attention to the transportation industry," Maya said simply. "It's part of my job." "Your job?" Victoria laughed. "What job? You look like you're barely out of college. I'm 24, exactly my point. What could you possibly do for work that would give you insights into major logistics companies?" Before Maya could answer, Jennifer Walsh, the head flight attendant, appeared at Carlos's shoulder. Jennifer was a 20-year veteran of the airline industry, a woman who had worked her way up from economy service to first-class management through a combination of competence, diplomacy, and an unshakable belief in the customer service hierarchy. She had heard the commotion from the galley and had come to see what was taking Carlos so long to resolve what should have been a simple seat reassignment. "What's the situation here?" Jennifer asked, her voice carrying the no-nonsense tone of someone accustomed to taking charge. Carlos looked relieved to have backup. "We have a passenger in 1A who refuses to move despite Mrs. Hammond's Diamond Elite status and her request for that specific suite." Jennifer looked at Maya with the kind of professional assessment that took in everything from her clothes to her posture to her facial expression. What she saw was a young black woman who clearly didn't belong in a $12,000 seat, probably trying to cause trouble or create a scene that she could later claim was discrimination. Miss Jennifer said to Maya, "I understand you may be frustrated, but we need to resolve this situation quickly. We have other passengers boarding, and we can't delay the flight for a seating dispute. I can offer you an upgrade to business class as compensation for the inconvenience." Business class. Maya's voice remained calm, but there was something underneath it now that made Tyler, still live-streaming, lean forward in anticipation. "You want me to downgrade from a first-class suite that I paid for to business class as compensation for accommodating someone else's demands? It's not a downgrade, it's a lateral move with compensation. A $12,000 suite to a $3,000 seat is a lateral move." Jennifer's professional smile faltered slightly. "The monetary difference isn't the point." "The monetary difference is exactly the point. I paid for specific amenities, a private suite, a flatbed dedicated service, privacy doors. Business class doesn't offer any of those things. You're asking me to accept a 75% reduction in value to accommodate Mrs. Hammond's demands. Mrs. Hammond is a Diamond Elite member with specific seating preferences. Mrs. Hammond is a passenger with a boarding pass, just like me. The only difference is that she's making demands, and I'm asking reasonable questions about why I should comply with those demands." Victoria, who had been listening to this exchange with growing fury, finally exploded. "Because people like you don't belong in seats like this. You're probably using a stolen credit card or some kind of employee discount that doesn't even apply to first class. I've been flying for 30 years and I know fraud when I see it." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Tyler's livestream comments exploded with outrage. Sarah Kim's LinkedIn viewers began sharing the stream across their own networks. Roberto Vega typed rapidly, adding Victoria's latest comments to his ongoing Twitter thread. Jennifer Walsh looked like she wanted to crawl under the aircraft's galley cart, but she was too deep into the situation to back down now. "Mrs. Hammond, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss privately," Victoria snapped. "This girl is obviously in the wrong seat with fraudulent documentation, and I want her removed immediately. Carlos, didn't you say you were calling security?" At that moment, Michael Torres, the co-pilot, appeared from the cockpit. Michael had 20 years of experience in commercial aviation, and he had heard enough of the commotion to realize that the situation was escalating beyond normal passenger service issues. As co-pilot, he had authority over cabin operations during pre-flight procedures, and right now they were already 15 minutes behind schedule. "What's the problem here?" Michael asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who outranked everyone in the conversation. Carlos immediately straightened up. "Sir, we have a passenger dispute over seating assignments. Mrs. Hammond has requested Suite 1A, but it's currently occupied by another passenger who refuses to move." Michael looked at Maya, taking in her age, her race, her casual clothing, and her calm demeanor. Like Jennifer and Carlos before him, he made an instant assessment based on assumptions that had been shaped by years of dealing with passenger scams, upgrade attempts, and fraudulent documentation. "Ma'am," Michael said to Maya, "I'm the co-pilot of this aircraft. We're already behind schedule, and we need to resolve this situation immediately. I understand Mrs. Hammond is one of our most valued customers, and I'm sure we can find you a suitable alternative seat." "Why don't you understand that I'm also a customer?" Maya asked. "Why does Mrs. Hammond's value automatically supersede mine? Because she's a Diamond Elite member with 15 years of loyalty to this airline, and I'm a passenger with a valid ticket for this seat. Since when does loyalty trump legal contracts?" Michael's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, I don't have time for legal debates. Either you move voluntarily or we'll have airport security escort you off the aircraft. Your choice." Maya looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of the crew members who had aligned against her, the other passengers watching with various degrees of discomfort and fascination, and the phone still recording every word of the exchange. She thought about her original plan to quietly observe and document the passenger experience. That plan had clearly gone out the window. "Officer Torres Maya said, reading his name tag, you're threatening to have me forcibly removed from a seat I legally purchased because another passenger wants it. Is that correct? I'm trying to resolve a situation that's disrupting the flight. By removing the passenger who's being discriminated against rather than addressing the passenger who's creating the disruption. No one is being discriminated against. This is about customer service and operational efficiency." Maya nodded slowly. "I see. So your definition of customer service is forcing paying passengers to accommodate the demands of other passengers based on status rather than legal rights. My definition of customer service is maintaining order and ensuring on-time departures, even if that means violating federal regulations regarding passenger rights and discrimination." Michael's face flushed red. "Don't lecture me about federal regulations, ma'am. I've been flying for 20 years and I know exactly what my authority is on this aircraft. Do you—" Maya's voice was still calm, but there was something new in her tone that made Tyler zoom in closer with his phone camera. "Officer Torres, are you familiar with DOT regulations regarding passenger removal? Specifically the requirements for documented cause and the prohibition against discrimination based on race, age, or socioeconomic status." Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't expecting a passenger in a hoodie to quote federal aviation regulations at him. "I don't need a lecture on DOT regulations from," he started to say, then caught himself. "From who?" Maya asked softly. "Finish that sentence, Officer Torres. From who don't you need a lecture on federal regulations?" The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler's live stream had reached over 4,000 viewers. Sarah's LinkedIn stream was being shared across corporate networks. Roberto's Twitter thread was gaining momentum with every retweet. And in the middle of it all, Maya Rodriguez sat calmly in Suite 1A waiting for the co-pilot to finish his thought. While the confrontation escalated in first class, the digital world was exploding with outrage. Tyler's TikTok livestream had hit 5,000 viewers and was climbing rapidly. The comments section was a waterfall of fury, support, and disbelief. This is 2024 and this is still happening. Get that racist woman's name and employer. The crew is just as bad as she is. Someone needs to call the CEO of this airline. Why is nobody helping her? This is going to be everywhere by tonight. I'm never flying SkyLink again. Tyler, trying to keep his voice low while providing commentary, whispered into his phone. Guys, this just keeps getting worse. Now the co-pilot is involved and he's basically threatening to have her arrested for sitting in her own seat. The young woman is asking about federal regulations and she clearly knows what she's talking about, but they're not listening to her at all. The viewer count hit 6,000, then 7,000. Tyler's follower notifications were going crazy as people shared his stream across other platforms. Meanwhile, Sarah Kim's LinkedIn Live had attracted attention from corporate executives across multiple industries. Her viewer count had reached 800, which for a professional platform was enormous for a real-time crisis. The comments on her stream were different from Tyler's, more measured, more focused on corporate responsibility and legal implications. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. SkyLink stock is going to tank tomorrow. I'm sharing this with our Chief Diversity Officer. We spend $2 million annually with SkyLink. Time to reconsider that partnership. Someone needs to screenshot everything for evidence. The optics on this are catastrophic. Sarah herself was typing rapid responses while keeping her camera trained on the confrontation. This is exactly the kind of institutional bias that we train our employees to recognize and combat. What you're seeing here is textbook discrimination, multiple authority figures aligning against one passenger based on assumptions about her race, age, and socioeconomic status. Roberto Vega's Twitter thread was exploding across the platform. His original tweet had been retweeted over 500 times, and each subsequent update was gaining momentum. 2/flight crew now includes co-pilot, who is threatening passenger removal for disrupting the flight. The disruption. Asking why she should give up her paid seat to accommodate someone else's demands. #SkyLink shame 3/young black passenger is now quoting federal DOT regulations regarding passenger rights. She clearly knows her legal protections. Crew appears uncomfortable with her knowledge but doubling down on removal threats. #SkyLink shame 4/other passengers are filming, live streaming. This is going viral in real time. SkyLink's reputation is being destroyed minute by minute while crew continues discriminatory behavior. #SkyLink shame. Roberto's followers included other journalists, civil rights organizations, and aviation industry insiders. Each retweet was spreading the story into new networks, creating a cascade effect that was already reaching thousands of people across the country. But it was Maria Santos who provided the most powerful real-time commentary. The 67-year-old retired teacher had pulled out her own phone and was recording video while providing a steady stream of narration based on her decades of experience fighting discrimination. "I've seen this before," Maria said loud enough for other passengers to hear. This is exactly how it used to happen in restaurants, hotels, buses. A black person would be in a space where white people didn't think they belonged, and authority figures would find any reasons to remove them. The language is more polite now, but the intent is identical. Victoria Hammond, who had been growing increasingly agitated as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control, whirled around to face Maria. This has nothing to do with race. This is about status and proper procedures. "What procedures?" Maria asked calmly. "Has anyone actually checked your boarding pass, Mrs. Hammond? Because I've watched this entire interaction and you've made demands based on your self-proclaimed status, but I haven't seen any crew member verify your actual seat assignment." Victoria's face went scarlet. "I don't have to prove anything to you or anyone else." "But she does." Maria gestured toward Maya. She's shown her boarding pass multiple times, but you don't have to show yours. I'm a Diamond Elite member, and she's a paying passenger. Why does your status matter more than her legal rights?" Tyler, catching this exchange on his live stream, whispered excitedly to his viewers, "Oh my God, guys. Now the older lady is absolutely destroying this entitled woman's arguments. The comments are going insane. We're at 8,000 viewers and climbing. The momentum was building across all platforms. #SkyLink Shame was trending nationally on Twitter. Tyler's TikTok was being shared to Instagram stories, Facebook groups, and messaging apps. Sarah's LinkedIn post was making its way through corporate America's professional networks. And all of it was happening in real time, creating a digital pressure cooker that was about to explode. But none of the crew members seemed to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. They were focused on the immediate problem in front of them, an uncooperative passenger who was refusing to follow instructions. They couldn't see the broader context. The viral spread the reputational catastrophe that was building with every passing minute. Michael Torres, the co-pilot, was growing visibly frustrated with Maya's calm defiance. "Ma'am, I've given you multiple opportunities to resolve this voluntarily. If you don't comply with crew instructions right now, I'll have no choice but to call airport security and have you removed from the aircraft." "For what violation?" Maya asked. "Failure to comply with crew instructions. What instruction am I failing to comply with? The instruction to move to a different seat." "Based on what authority? Under what regulation?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Based on my authority as co-pilot of this aircraft. Your authority to do what? Specifically remove paying passengers from seats they've legally purchased because other passengers demand those seats. My authority to maintain order and safety." "How does my sitting quietly in my assigned seat threaten order or safety?" "You're being argumentative and disruptive. I'm asking questions about the legal basis for your demands. If you consider that disruptive, perhaps the problem isn't with my questions, but with your lack of answers." Tyler's live stream comments exploded. "She's destroying them with logic. This woman is a lawyer or something. They have no legal ground to stand on. She knows more about airline law than the crew. This is the most epic takedown I've ever seen." And that's when Victoria Hammond made the mistake that would define the rest of her life. Frustrated beyond reason, humiliated by her inability to simply get what she wanted, and furious at being challenged by someone she considered beneath her notice, she abandoned any pretense of politeness. "Listen here, you little ghetto princess," Victoria snarled, her voice carrying throughout the cabin. "I don't care what your fake ticket says or what regulations you think you know. This seat costs more than your entire wardrobe. You don't belong here. People like you never belong here. And if you don't move to the back where you belong, I'll make sure you're dragged out in handcuffs like the criminal you obviously are." The cabin went dead silent. Even the ambient aircraft noise seemed to pause in shock. Tyler's phone nearly slipped from his hands. Sarah Kim's LinkedIn viewers started typing in all caps. Roberto Vega's fingers flew across his phone keyboard. And Maria Santos spoke into the silence with a voice that carried 40 years of teaching authority. "Well, now we see who you really are." Maya Rodriguez looked up at Victoria Hammond with an expression of profound calm. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that everyone had to strain to hear it, which made her words even more powerful. "Mrs. Hammond, thank you for making this so clear. I was beginning to think this might be about airline policies or seating procedures, but you've just confirmed that this is exactly what I suspected it was from the beginning." Maya pulled out her phone, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she started dialing a number. "Who are you calling?" Carlos asked nervously. Maya looked up at him with that same calm expression, but now there was something else behind her eyes. Something that made Tyler zoom in closer, made Sarah lean forward in her seat, made Roberto hold his breath as he typed. "I'm calling the owner," Maya said simply. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered. Aurora Holdings' Elena Santiago speaking. Maya hit the speaker button, and suddenly the entire first-class cabin could hear both sides of the conversation. Tyler's live stream exploded with excited comments as viewers realized they were about to witness something unprecedented. "Elena, it's Maya. I'm on SkyLink Flight 447 experiencing some customer service issues. Maya. Are you okay? I've been monitoring social media. There are multiple live streams and posts about discrimination on your flight. The hashtag #SkyLink shame is trending nationally. Victoria Hammond, Carlos Martinez, Jennifer Walsh, and Michael Torres all looked at each other with growing confusion. Who was this Elena person? Why did she know about social media posts that were happening right now? And why was she talking to the passenger in Suite 1A, like they knew each other personally? I'm fine. Maya continued, her voice still calm, but with an undertone that suggested things were about to change dramatically. But I think it's time to implement Protocol 7. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Elena spoke again, her voice carried a new weight. Are you sure Protocol 7 is comprehensive? I'm sure. Mrs. Hammond here has made it very clear that people like me don't belong in seats like this. Officer Torres has threatened to have me forcibly removed for asking questions about passenger rights. The crew has consistently supported discriminatory demands based on assumptions about my race and socioeconomic status. And it's all been documented by multiple witnesses. Understood. Protocol 7 is now active. Maya, I'm looking at the live streams right now. Over 10,000 people are watching this in real time across multiple platforms. The story is spreading to traditional media. CNN's transportation correspondent just tweeted about it. Victoria's face had gone pale. Who is Elena? Who are you talking to? Maya looked up at her with an expression of mild curiosity. Elena Santiago is my chief operating officer. She handles day-to-day operations for our various companies. Your company's, Jennifer Walsh's professional composure was starting to crack. What company's Aurora Holdings? Maya said simply. We own several businesses in the technology and transportation sectors. Michael Torres stepped forward, his authority suddenly feeling much less certain. Ma'am, I don't know what kind of game you're playing. Officer Torres. Elena's voice came through the phone speaker, cutting him off. This is Elena Santiago, COO of Aurora Holdings. I need you to understand something very important about the situation you're currently in. I don't have to listen to actually you do. Because 3 months ago, Aurora Holdings acquired SkyLink Airways through our transportation division. Which means Maya Rodriguez, the young woman you've been threatening to remove from her legally purchased seat, owns the airline you work for. The silence that followed was so complete that Tyler thought his phone had frozen. He checked the viewer count. 12,000 people were watching live as the most spectacular corporate karma event in aviation history unfolded in real time. Carlos Martinez's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Jennifer Walsh grabbed onto the nearest seat to steady herself. Michael Torres looked like he was about to be sick, and Victoria Hammond stared at Maya with an expression of dawning horror. That's impossible, Victoria whispered. Maya pulled out her phone and opened her Aurora Holdings Company profile. The screen clearly showed her photo title, founder and CEO, and company information. She held it up for everyone to see. Mrs. Hammond, meet Maya Rodriguez, founder and CEO of Aurora Holdings, owner of Aurora Tech, and as of 3 months ago, owner of SkyLink Airways, the airline you've been demanding special treatment from, the airline whose employees you've been ordering to discriminate against its owner. Elena's voice continued through the speaker. Maya, I have legal, HR, and our crisis management team on standby. The acquisition wasn't publicly announced, so the crew genuinely didn't know who you are, but their behavior has created massive liability for the company. How do you want to proceed? Maya looked around the cabin, taking in the shocked faces of the crew, the fascinated expressions of the other passengers, and the phones still recording every moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had just revealed that she held all the cards in a game everyone else thought they were winning. Elena. I want a complete investigation into customer service protocols, crew training, and discrimination policies. I want to know if this treatment is isolated, or if it represents a pattern of behavior. And I want full documentation of everything that's happened here today, already in progress. I've had legal reviewing the live streams and social media posts. Maya, the crew's behavior has created significant legal liability. Federal regulations prohibit discrimination in airline services, and threatening passenger removal based on race or perceived economic status violates multiple DOT guidelines. Jennifer Walsh finally found her voice. "Miss Rodriguez, if you had known what Maya's tone was still calm, but there was steel underneath. If you had known I owned the company, you would have treated me with respect. What about all the other passengers who don't own airlines? What about the young black woman who flies SkyLink next week and gets treated the way you've treated me today? You don't normally what? Threaten to remove passengers for asking questions. Support discriminatory demands from high-status customers. Assume that young people of color are using fraudulent tickets." Carlos stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Miss Rodriguez, please. I was just trying to resolve a customer service issue by forcing a paying passenger to give up her seat to accommodate someone else's demands, without checking that person's actual ticket, based purely on your assessment of who belonged in first class and who didn't. Tyler still live streaming to over 13,000 viewers whispered into his phone, 'Guys, this is insane. She owns the entire airline. This woman just tried to have the airline owner removed from her own plane. I can't even believe this is real.' The comments on his stream were moving too fast to read best plot twist ever. This is better than any movie. That racist woman is about to lose everything. Justice is being served in real time. Screenshot everything." Maria Santos, who had been watching the revelation with satisfaction, spoke up from her seat. "Young lady, I've been fighting discrimination for 50 years, and I have never seen karma work this fast or this perfectly." Victoria Hammond was still staring at Maya in shock. "You're lying. You can't possibly own an airline. You're too young. You're dressed like what, Mrs. Hammond?" Maya's voice was dangerously quiet. "Please finish that sentence." Dressed like what? Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came out. Elena Maya continued into the phone. "I think it's time for the full revelation. Please contact Captain Mitchell in the cockpit and explain the situation. I want him to make an announcement to the entire aircraft. Are you sure? Once we do that, there's no going back. This becomes a full corporate crisis." Maya looked around the cabin one more time, taking in the crew members who had discriminated against her, the passenger who had hurled racist abuse at her, and the witnesses who had documented everything. "I'm sure it's time for everyone to understand exactly what's been happening here today." Elena Santiago's voice came through the phone speaker with the crisp efficiency of someone who had managed corporate crises for Fortune 500 companies before joining Aurora Holdings as Chief Operating Officer. At 42, Elena had built her reputation on turning chaos into clarity, but even she had never handled a situation quite like this. "Maya, I'm patching in Captain Mitchell now. He needs to hear this directly from you." The phone line crackled with the sound of the aircraft's communication system connecting. Then a new voice joined the conversation, older, confused, and clearly stressed. "This is Captain David Mitchell. I understand there's some kind of emergency situation in the first-class cabin." Captain Mitchell Maya's voice remained calm and professional. "This is Maya Rodriguez, passenger in Suite 1A. I'm also the founder and CEO of Aurora Holdings, which acquired SkyLink Airways 3 months ago, which makes me your boss." The silence on the line stretched long enough that Tyler, still live streaming to over 14,000 viewers, began to worry his phone had lost connection. When Captain Mitchell finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "Captain, I own this airline. I've been sitting in Suite 1A experiencing widespread discrimination from your crew. A passenger named Victoria Hammond has subjected me to racist abuse while demanding that I give up my seat based on her assumption that I don't belong in first class. Your crew, including co-pilot Torres, head flight attendant Walsh, and flight attendant Martinez, have supported her demands and threatened me with forced removal for refusing to comply with discriminatory orders." Elena's voice rejoined the conversation. "Captain Mitchell, I'm Elena Santiago, COO of Aurora Holdings. I can confirm Miss Rodriguez's identity and authority. The acquisition of SkyLink was finalized 90 days ago, but we chose not to make it public until we could complete a full assessment of operations. What you're dealing with right now is the owner of your company being discriminated against by your crew." Captain Mitchell's breathing was audible through the phone. "Dear God, Miss Rodriguez, I had no idea." "That's exactly the point, Captain. You had no idea who I was, so your crew felt comfortable treating me like a second-class passenger. What does that say about how you treat other passengers who don't have corporate protection?" Tyler's livestream comments were moving too fast to read, but the sentiment was clear. Viewers were watching history being made in real time. Sarah Kim's LinkedIn stream had reached over 1,200 professional viewers, and Roberto Vega's Twitter thread was being retweeted by verified journalists and civil rights organizations. Captain Elena continued, "I'm looking at social media right now. Multiple passengers have been live streaming and documenting this incident. #SkyLink Shame is trending nationally. We've got over 50,000 social media interactions in the past hour alone. Traditional media is picking up the story. This has become a full-scale public relations crisis." "What are your instructions?" Captain Mitchell asked, his voice hollow. Maya stood up in Suite 1A, finally revealing her full height and presence. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had built a $12 billion company from a college dorm room. "Captain Mitchell, I want you to contact airport operations and request priority clearance for an emergency landing at Newark Liberty International Airport. This aircraft is being grounded pending a full investigation into crew conduct and passenger discrimination policies." "An emergency landing," Jennifer Walsh gasped. "Miss Rodriguez, please, we can resolve this internally, Miss Walsh. You had multiple opportunities to resolve this internally. You chose instead to support discriminatory behavior and threaten a paying passenger with forced removal. The time for internal resolution has passed." Victoria Hammond, who had been standing frozen in shock since the revelation of Maya's identity, finally found her voice. Wait, this is all a misunderstanding. I never meant Mrs. Hammond." Maya's voice cut through her protest like a laser. "Let me read back exactly what you said to me 15 minutes ago. Listen here, you little ghetto princess. This seat costs more than your entire wardrobe. You don't belong here. People like you never belong here. And if you don't move to the back where you belong, I'll make sure you're dragged out in handcuffs like the criminal you obviously are." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Tyler's viewers were typing in all caps. Sarah's professional network was sharing the stream across corporate America. Roberto's thread was being picked up by national news outlets. "I was upset," Victoria stammered. "I didn't mean you meant every word," Maya replied. "And your words were based on your assessment of my race, my age, my clothing, and your assumption about my economic status. That's textbook discrimination, Mrs. Hammond. And it was supported by a flight crew that made the same assumptions you did." Elena's voice cut through the tension. "Maya, I've got our legal team on conference call. They advise immediate documentation of all crew actions, passenger statements, and witness testimony. They also recommend full cooperation with federal authorities once we land." "Understood. Captain Mitchell, please make the announcement to passengers. I want complete transparency about what's happening and why." "Miss Rodriguez, an announcement like that will create panic. Captain, the only panic should be among people who think it's acceptable to discriminate against passengers based on race or appearance. Everyone else will be fine." Michael Torres, who had been standing silent since learning Maya's identity, stepped forward with his hands raised. "Miss Rodriguez, please. I was just following standard procedures. Standard procedures for what? Threatening passenger removal based on discriminatory complaints, supporting unsubstantiated claims about fraudulent tickets, refusing to verify the actual seat assignments of complaining passengers. I thought you thought what, Officer Torres? That a young black woman in casual clothes couldn't possibly afford first class, that Mrs. Hammond's demands were automatically more valid than my rights, that your authority as co-pilot extended to removing passengers for asking questions about federal regulations." The co-pilot's face had gone ashen. "I made a mistake. You made multiple mistakes, all based on the same prejudiced assumptions. And those mistakes were witnessed by hundreds of passengers and documented by thousands of people online." Captain Mitchell's voice crackled through the speaker. "All passengers, this is your captain speaking. Due to operational issues that require immediate attention, we will be making an emergency landing at Newark Liberty International Airport. This is not a mechanical emergency, but we must address urgent company business before continuing to London. Please remain seated and follow all crew instructions." The cabin erupted in confused murmurs. Passengers pulled out their phones to text families and check social media. Many of them discovered that they were on the flight that was already going viral across the internet. Tyler, still live-streaming, provided commentary for his 15,000 viewers. "Guys, this is unprecedented. The owner of an airline is grounding her own flight because of discrimination from her crew. This is going to change everything about how airlines handle passenger disputes." Elena's voice came through Maya's phone again. "Maya, we've got media trucks already heading to Newark. The story has hit CNN, Fox Business, and major aviation industry publications. Our stock price is actually up 8% because investors are impressed with your handling of corporate accountability. What about SkyLink's reputation? Well, that's complicated. The discrimination is obviously terrible PR, but your response is being praised as executive leadership. It's a mixed message, but the overall narrative is positive for Aurora Holdings." Maya nodded, processing the information. She looked around the first-class cabin, taking in the faces of crew members who had gone from confident authority figures to terrified employees in the span of 20 minutes. She saw Victoria Hammond clutching her purse like a life preserver, her earlier arrogance replaced by dawning understanding of the consequences of her words. She saw other passengers filming everything, documenting a moment that would be studied in business schools and diversity training programs for years to come. As the aircraft began its descent towards Newark, Captain Mitchell's voice filled the cabin with an announcement that no airline passenger had ever heard before. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain with an important update. I need to inform you that we are landing at Newark due to a serious incident involving crew conduct and passenger discrimination. One of our passengers has been subjected to racially motivated harassment from both crew members and another passenger despite having valid documentation for her seat assignment." The murmur in the cabin grew louder. Phones came out across economy and business class as passengers began recording and texting. "I want to be completely transparent with you about what has occurred. The passenger who was targeted for discrimination is Maya Rodriguez, founder and CEO of Aurora Holdings, which owns SkyLink Airways. Miss Rodriguez was flying incognito to assess customer service, and what she experienced represents a complete failure of our stated values and federal aviation requirements." Victoria Hammond made a small choking sound. Carlos Martinez dropped into an empty seat, his face white as paper. Jennifer Walsh stared at the ceiling as if hoping it would open up and swallow her. The incident has been witnessed by multiple passengers and live-streamed across social media platforms. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities and conducting immediate internal investigations. On behalf of SkyLink Airways and Aurora Holdings, I want to personally apologize to Ms. Rodriguez and to all passengers for this inexcusable failure. Captain Mitchell paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of someone whose career had just taken a dramatic turn. Ms. Rodriguez has handled this situation with remarkable grace and professionalism. She could have simply identified herself immediately and ended the discrimination, but she chose to document the full extent of the problem to ensure that other passengers would be protected from similar treatment in the future. Her commitment to passenger rights and equal treatment is exactly the kind of leadership this industry needs. Tyler's live stream had reached 18,000 viewers. The comments were a mixture of shock admiration for Maya and calls for justice. She let them discriminate against her to protect future passengers. "This is the most ethical CEO I've ever seen. That racist woman is about to lose everything. The crew is done. This is going to change the airline industry forever." Elena's voice came through Maya's phone. "Maya, I'm getting calls from the Department of Transportation, the NAACP, and about 50 journalists. How do you want to handle media once you land?" Maya looked out the window as the Newark skyline came into view. "Set up a press conference in the terminal. I want to be completely transparent about what happened and what we're going to do about it." This can't be swept under the rug or handled with quiet settlements. Understood. I've also got our HR director on standby for immediate crew interviews and our legal team preparing documentation for federal authorities. Maria Santos, who had been quietly observing the entire situation, spoke up from her seat. Miss Rodriguez, I've been fighting discrimination for 50 years, and I've never seen anyone handle it with such strategic brilliance. You turned their prejudice against them and made them destroy themselves with their own words. Maya smiled at the older woman. Mrs. Santos, thank you for speaking up when you did. Allies like you are the reason change actually happens. Oh, honey, I was just getting started. I'm a retired teacher. I know how to handle bullies. The aircraft touched down at Newark with a gentle bump, and immediately Maya could see the chaos outside. News trucks, airport security vehicles, and what appeared to be federal investigators were already positioned near their gate. Captain Mitchell's final announcement crackled through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Newark. Please remain seated until federal authorities and company representatives board the aircraft. This is an active investigation, and we need to ensure proper documentation of all events. Thank you for your patience and understanding during this unprecedented situation. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Maya's phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues, friends, and business associates who had seen the story breaking on news feeds. But the message that meant the most came from her grandmother in Detroit. Baby, I saw the news. I'm proud of you for standing up with dignity. That's how change happens, not with anger, but with strength. The aircraft came to a complete stop at Gate C-24, and immediately Maya could see the small army of officials waiting outside FBI agents required for any aircraft emergency landing, federal aviation inspectors, Newark airport security, and a growing crowd of media representatives. But before anyone boarded the aircraft, Maya had some unfinished business. She stood up in Suite 1A, her full presence finally revealed. At 5'6", Maya Rodriguez wasn't physically imposing, but the authority in her bearing was unmistakable. When she spoke, her voice carried throughout the first-class cabin with the quiet power of someone who had just demonstrated that assumptions about power could be very, very wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address what has happened here today before we're all interviewed separately by investigators. Tyler repositioned his phone to capture Maya's statement. His viewer count had reached 20,000, and he knew he was documenting history. My name is Maya Rodriguez. I am the founder and CEO of Aurora Holdings, which owns SkyLink Airways. 3 months ago, I acquired this airline because I believed in its potential and its stated commitment to serving all passengers with dignity and respect. Maya's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath that made everyone in the cabin hang on every word. Today, I flew incognito to experience our customer service firsthand. What I experienced was not an isolated incident, but a pattern of discrimination that appears to be embedded in crew training and passenger service protocols. Carlos Martinez, who had been sitting with his head in his hands, looked up with tears in his eyes. Jennifer Walsh stared at the floor. Michael Torres stood frozen by the cockpit door. Mrs. Hammond Maya continued turning to face Victoria. Your words and behavior today weren't just personally hurtful. They revealed assumptions about race, class, and belonging that have no place in modern society. You assumed that my appearance and clothing meant I couldn't afford first class, that my ticket was fraudulent, and that I belonged in the back of the aircraft. Victoria opened her mouth as if to speak, but Maya continued without pause. Mr. Martinez, Miss Walsh, Officer Torres, you supported those assumptions without question. You didn't ask to see Mrs. Hammond's boarding pass, didn't verify her claims about seating assignments, and didn't consider that your own biases might be influencing your judgment. When I asked questions about federal regulations and passenger rights, you responded with threats rather than answers. The cabin was dead silent except for the sound of phones recording and the distant noise of emergency vehicles outside. But I want to be clear about something. This experience, as painful and infuriating as it was, has given me exactly the information I needed to make Aurora Holdings and SkyLink Airways the industry leader in passenger rights and equal treatment. Elena's voice came through Maya's phone, which was still on speaker Maya. The federal investigators are ready to board. They want to interview crew members first, then passengers, then you. Understood. Before they board, I want to make my intentions clear to everyone who's been involved in this situation. Maya looked around the cabin, making eye contact with each crew member. Mr. Martinez, your employment with SkyLink Airways is terminated effective immediately. Miss Walsh, you're suspended pending a full investigation into discrimination training and passenger service protocols. Officer Torres, your actions will be reviewed by federal aviation authorities, and your pilot's license status will be evaluated by the FAA. The crew members' faces went ashen, but Maya wasn't finished. Mrs. Hammond Aurora Holdings will be filing a formal complaint with federal authorities regarding your discriminatory behavior toward a passenger. Additionally, we'll be reviewing whether your conduct violates federal laws regarding airline passenger harassment. Victoria's voice came out as a whisper. Miss Rodriguez, please. I'm sorry, I never meant Mrs. Hammond. You meant exactly what you said. Your apology now isn't about remorse, it's about consequences. If you had discovered I was the airline owner before saying those things, would you have said them? Victoria's silence was answer enough. That's the problem. Your respect and decent treatment shouldn't depend on someone's status or power. Every passenger deserves what you would have given me if you'd known who I was. Tyler whispered to his live stream viewers. This is incredible. She's handling corporate accountability in real time. 21,000 people are watching this happen live. The aircraft door opened and federal investigators began boarding. Maya watched as FBI agents and DOT inspectors filled the first-class cabin, their presence transforming what had started as a customer service dispute into a federal investigation. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead FBI investigator, approached Maya's seat. Miss Rodriguez, I'm Agent Chen. We'll need to conduct individual interviews with all parties involved. Are you prepared to provide a full statement about what occurred? Absolutely. I've also got documented evidence from multiple witnesses, live stream footage, and recorded audio of the entire incident. Excellent. We'll start with crew interviews, then passengers, then we'll need extended time with you for a comprehensive statement. Maya nodded, then looked around the cabin one last time at the crew members who had discriminated against her, the passenger who had abused her, and the witnesses who had documented everything. Agent Chen, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge or punishment. This is about ensuring that what happened to me today never happens to another passenger. We're going to use this incident to create industry-leading standards for passenger treatment and crew training. As federal agents began separating crew members for individual interviews, Maya's phone buzzed with another message from Elena. Maya, initial media response is overwhelmingly positive. You're being praised for transparency and accountability. Stock price is up 12%. We're getting interview requests from every major news network. Maya typed back, set up interviews. This story needs to be told completely and honestly. No corporate spin, no damage control, just truth. The transformation of SkyLink Airways and the airline industry's approach to passenger discrimination was about to begin. The scene outside Gate C-24 at Newark Liberty International Airport looked like a cross between a major news event and a federal investigation. Within 2 hours of Maya's aircraft touching down, the story had exploded across every major media platform in the country. News trucks from CNN, Fox, NBC, ABC, and CBS lined the terminal access roads. Social media was on fire with hashtags trending worldwide. #SkyLink Shame, #Aurora Justice, #Airline Accountability, and #Maya Rodriguez. Inside the aircraft, federal investigators were methodically documenting one of the most comprehensively witnessed cases of airline discrimination in aviation history. Agent Sarah Chen had never worked a case where so much evidence was available in real time. Multiple live streams, professional social media documentation, witness statements, and audio recordings all captured the incident from beginning to end. Tyler Brooks, whose TikTok livestream had reached 25,000 viewers before investigators asked him to pause recording, was being interviewed by Agent Chen about his documentation of the incident. Mr. Brooks, your live stream captured approximately 40 minutes of discriminatory behavior. Can you walk me through what you observed? Tyler, still somewhat stunned by the magnitude of what he'd witnessed, nodded enthusiastically. Agent Chen, I've been a travel influencer for 3 years. I've seen passenger disputes, angry customers, flight delays, everything. But I've never seen anything like this. The flight crew didn't just fail to stop discrimination, they actively participated in it. Can you be specific about crew actions? Absolutely. Mr. Martinez immediately took Mrs. Hammond's side without checking any documentation. Miss Walsh offered to downgrade Miss Rodriguez to business class rather than requiring Mrs. Hammond to show her boarding pass. Officer Torres threatened to have Miss Rodriguez arrested for asking questions about federal regulations. They treated her like a problem to be solved rather than a passenger with rights. Meanwhile, Sarah Kim was providing her professional perspective to Agent Maria Gonzalez, a DOT investigator specializing in airline discrimination cases. As someone who works in corporate diversity and inclusion, Sarah explained what I witnessed represents textbook institutional bias. Multiple authority figures aligned against one passenger based on visual assumptions about her race, age, and socioeconomic status. The crew's behavior suggests either inadequate training or cultural acceptance of discriminatory practices. Roberto Vega was documenting everything for his follow-up article already titled How Social Media Accountability Changed an Industry in Real Time. His Twitter thread had been retweeted over 10,000 times, and his editor at the Miami Herald had given him carte blanche to cover every angle of the story. But it was Maria Santos who provided the most powerful historical context to investigators. The 67-year-old retired teacher had lived through the civil rights movement, had personal experience with institutionalized discrimination, and could speak to how far society had come and how far it still had to go. Agent Gonzalez Maria said during her interview, I've seen discrimination in buses, restaurants, hotels, and schools. What happened today wasn't different in intent, it was different in scale. This young woman turned their prejudice into documentation, their assumptions into evidence, and their bias into accountability. She didn't just experience discrimination, she strategically revealed it for the whole world to see. While passenger interviews continued, the crew members were facing the immediate consequences of their actions. Carlos Martinez was being interviewed by both FBI agents and Aurora Holdings' HR director, Michelle Foster, who had flown in from company headquarters specifically to handle the personnel crisis. Mr. Martinez Michelle said, reviewing his employment file, "You've been with SkyLink for 12 years. Your record shows customer service training every year, including modules on discrimination prevention and federal passenger rights. Can you explain how your actions today align with that training?" Carlos, who looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 hours, shook his head. They don't align at all. I made assumptions and I was wrong. I let Mrs. Hammond's status influence my judgment and I didn't follow proper procedures. What proper procedures? I should have checked both passengers' documentation. I should have verified seat assignments in the computer. I should have remained neutral instead of taking sides. I should have called a supervisor when the situation escalated. But you didn't do any of those things. No, ma'am. Why? Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Because I looked at Miss Rodriguez and assumed she didn't belong in first class. Because I've been trained to keep high-status passengers happy. Because I thought it was easier to move the young woman in the hoodie than to challenge the demanding woman in designer clothes. Michelle made notes in his file. Mr. Martinez, your honesty is appreciated, but your employment with Aurora Holdings is terminated. You'll receive severance as outlined in your contract, but your termination will be noted as discrimination-related, which will affect your ability to work in the aviation industry. Similar conversations were happening with Jennifer Walsh and Michael Torres. Both were learning that their careers in aviation were effectively over. The discrimination had been too public, too well documented, and too contrary to federal regulations for Aurora Holdings to consider any outcome other than immediate termination. Meanwhile, Maya Rodriguez was in a secure conference room with Elena Santiago Aurora's legal team and federal investigators providing a comprehensive statement about the incident and her plans for industry-wide change. Ms. Rodriguez Agent Chen said your response to this discrimination was unusual. You had the power to stop it immediately by revealing your identity, but you chose to let it continue. Can you explain that decision? Maya leaned back in her chair, considering her words carefully. Agent Chen, if I had identified myself as the airline owner after Mrs. Hammond's first discriminatory comment, 3 things would have happened. First, the crew would have immediately shifted their behavior to accommodate me. Second, Mrs. Hammond would have either apologized or escalated her demands to corporate leadership. Third, the underlying problem would have been hidden rather than revealed. What underlying problem? The assumption that passengers who look like me don't belong in premium seats and that crew members can support discriminatory demands without consequences. If I had stopped the discrimination early, we would never have seen the full extent of the bias problem. Agent Chen made notes. So you deliberately allowed yourself to experience discrimination to document widespread issues. I documented discrimination that was already happening. I didn't create the bias, I revealed it. And now we have comprehensive evidence of how deeply embedded these assumptions are in airline culture. Elena added Maya's decision to let the situation play out naturally gave us unprecedented insight into crew training failures and policy gaps. We now know exactly what needs to be changed to prevent this from happening to other passengers. The legal team was already preparing for multiple outcomes: federal civil rights violations, potential lawsuits from Victoria Hammond, though those were expected to fail, and regulatory changes that Aurora Holdings wanted to lead rather than follow. Within 6 hours of Maya's aircraft landing, the story had created ripple effects across multiple industries. SkyLink Airways stock had initially dropped 8% before recovering as investors realized that Aurora Holdings' response was being praised for transparency and accountability. Other major airlines saw their stock prices fluctuate as investors wondered how similar incidents might affect their companies. United Airlines issued a statement within hours. United is committed to serving all passengers with dignity and respect regardless of race, age, or appearance. We are reviewing our crew training protocols to ensure compliance with federal anti-discrimination requirements. American Airlines followed with today's events at SkyLink Airways highlight the importance of comprehensive bias training and passenger rights education. American Airlines is implementing immediate policy reviews to ensure our crews are equipped to handle all passenger interactions fairly and professionally. Delta Airlines' statement was more comprehensive. Delta condemns discrimination in all forms and commends Aurora Holdings for their transparent handling of today's incident. We are partnering with civil rights organizations to enhance our training programs and ensure that every passenger experience reflects our values of inclusion and respect. The Department of Transportation issued an emergency directive to all commercial airlines. Today's well-documented incident of passenger discrimination requires immediate industry-wide response. All carriers must review crew training protocols, implement enhanced anti-discrimination policies, and report compliance within 30 days. But the most significant industry response came from the International Air Transport Association, IATA, which announced the formation of a new Passenger Rights and Dignity Initiative with Maya Rodriguez, invited to serve as the founding chair. Meanwhile, corporate America was taking notice of Maya's handling of the crisis. Within hours of her press conference at Newark Airport, she received calls from the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies asking her to consult on diversity and inclusion initiatives. "This is how you handle a corporate crisis," tweeted the CEO of a major consulting firm. "Transparency, accountability, and immediate action." Maya Rodriguez just wrote the playbook for executive leadership in the digital age. Harvard Business School announced that the SkyLink incident would be included in their crisis management curriculum. The Wharton School invited Maya to speak about ethical leadership and corporate accountability. Stanford's Graduate School of Business requested permission to document the incident as a case study in stakeholder management and social responsibility. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from civil rights organizations. The NAACP issued a statement praising Maya's strategic brilliance in documenting discrimination and her commitment to protecting future passengers. The National Urban League highlighted her response as an example of how to use power and privilege to create change rather than avoid responsibility. Social media metrics told the story of cultural impact Maya Rodriguez had been tweeted over 200,000 times. Airline accountability was trending in 12 countries. Tyler's original TikTok had been viewed over 2 million times. Sarah's LinkedIn post had become the most shared business content of the year. Traditional media was equally captivated. CNN's Anderson Cooper requested an exclusive interview. 60 Minutes wanted to do a segment on discrimination in the airline industry. The Today Show invited Maya to discuss corporate leadership and social responsibility. But the response that meant the most to Maya came in the form of messages from young people of color across the country who had experienced similar discrimination but had never seen anyone fight back effectively. Miss Rodriguez read one message. "I'm a 22-year-old black woman who experienced discrimination on a flight last year, but I didn't know how to document it or who to report it to. Watching you handle this situation taught me that I have rights and that I don't have to accept being treated badly. Thank you for showing us how to stand up with dignity and intelligence." Another message read, "I'm a Hispanic college student who has been discriminated against in restaurants and stores. Your response showed me that calm strength is more powerful than anger. You didn't yell or lose your temper, you just documented the truth and let their own words destroy their defense. That's the kind of leadership our generation needs to learn." While Maya Rodriguez was being praised across corporate America for her handling of the crisis, the people who had discriminated against her were facing very different consequences. The speed and comprehensiveness of their professional destruction was stunning, even by digital age standards. Victoria Hammond's fall from grace was the most dramatic. Within 12 hours of the incident, multiple videos of her racist rants had been compiled into a compilation that was shared across every major social media platform. Her husband's company, Sterling Logistics, began receiving calls from clients threatening to cancel contracts if Victoria remained associated with the company. Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Logistics, called an emergency board meeting 18 hours after his wife's public meltdown. The conversation was brief and brutal. Richard said, "Board member Patricia Williams, we've received cancellation notices from 3 major clients in the past 6 hours. Our PR firm says the situation is unmanageable as long as Victoria is connected to the company. Our legal team warns that her comments could expose us to discrimination lawsuits from our own employees." "What are you suggesting?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. "We're suggesting you handle your wife's situation immediately, or the board will be forced to handle your situation." That afternoon, Richard Sterling released a public statement. Sterling Logistics condemns the discriminatory language and behavior exhibited by Victoria Hammond. Ms. Hammond has no official role with our company, and her views do not represent Sterling Logistics' values or policies. We are committed to serving customers and employees of all backgrounds with dignity and respect. The statement didn't mention that Victoria was his wife. By evening, divorce papers had been filed. Victoria's social circle abandoned her with the speed of people fleeing a sinking ship. The country club where she had held membership for 15 years quietly informed her that her membership was being reviewed. Charity boards asked for her resignation. Friends stopped returning her calls. But the most devastating blow came from her own family. Victoria's daughter Amanda, a 28-year-old marketing executive in Boston, released her own statement. "I was horrified to learn about my mother's discriminatory behavior toward Miss Rodriguez and other passengers. Her words and actions do not represent the values I was raised with or the person I thought I knew. I support Miss Rodriguez's efforts to create change in the airline industry and apologize for my mother's contribution to a culture of discrimination and prejudice." Carlos Martinez's fall was quieter but equally comprehensive. The 12-year veteran of the airline industry discovered that discrimination-related termination was a career-ending event. Airlines wouldn't hire him. Corporate aviation companies rejected his applications. Even charter flight services refused to consider his resume once background checks revealed his role in the SkyLink incident. 6 months later, Carlos was working as a restaurant server in Phoenix, trying to rebuild his life and career from scratch. The pay was a fraction of what he had made as a flight attendant, and the airline benefits that had supported his family were gone. His wife had to return to work, and his children asked why Daddy couldn't work on airplanes anymore. Jennifer Walsh's 20-year aviation career ended just as abruptly. As head flight attendant, she was held to higher standards of professional conduct, and her support of discriminatory passenger demands violated both company policy and federal regulations. The termination letter cited gross misconduct related to passenger discrimination and failure to uphold federal civil rights protections. Like Carlos, Jennifer discovered that the aviation industry was unforgiving of discrimination-related terminations. Flight attendant positions at other airlines were impossible to secure. Corporate training roles were unavailable. Even ground-based customer service positions were denied to her once employers conducted background checks. Jennifer eventually found work as a retail supervisor at a department store, earning less than half her former salary and facing daily reminders of how far she had fallen. She enrolled in sensitivity training courses and diversity workshops, trying to understand how she had let bias override her professional judgment, but the damage to her reputation was irreversible. Michael Torres faced the most severe professional consequences. As co-pilot, he held a position of federal authority and had threatened a passenger with arrest for asserting her civil rights. The FAA launched a full investigation into his conduct, and his pilot's license was suspended pending review. The suspension destroyed his career immediately. Airlines require active, unrestricted pilot licenses, and no carrier would employ someone under FAA investigation for civil rights violations. Michael's applications to other aviation companies, cargo carriers, charter services, flight training schools were all rejected. After 8 months of unemployment, Michael relocated to Florida and found work as a commercial truck driver. The job required similar skills to aviation: attention to safety, adherence to federal regulations, long hours away from home, but the pay was a third of what he had earned as a commercial pilot, and the social status was incomparably lower. The psychological impact was severe. Michael had defined himself as a pilot, for 20 years had built his identity around his aviation expertise and authority. Working as a truck driver, he struggled with depression and anxiety, wondering how he had let prejudice override 2 decades of professional training. But perhaps the most important personal reckoning came from an unexpected source. 3 months after the incident, Maya received a handwritten letter from Carlos Martinez's teenage daughter, Sofia. "Miss Rodriguez," the letter read, "My father lost his job because of how he treated you, and our family has been struggling ever since. But I want you to know that what happened has taught me something important about standing up for what's right. I've been watching how you handled the situation with dignity and strength instead of anger, and it's shown me the kind of person I want to be. My father made mistakes, but you've made changes that will protect people like me from experiencing what you experienced. Thank you for caring about strangers enough to fight for us." The letter was accompanied by a photo of Sofia Martinez wearing a T-shirt that read, "Dignity is not negotiable," and holding a sign that said, "Thank you, Maya Rodriguez, for standing up for all of us." Maya framed the letter and photo in her office, a reminder that the most important changes often come at significant personal cost, but that the cost of not fighting injustice is always higher. 6 months after the SkyLink Airways incident, Maya Rodriguez sat in the executive lounge at Aurora Holdings headquarters in Austin, Texas, looking out at the city skyline and reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed since that humid Miami morning when Victoria Hammond first told her she didn't belong in first class. The numerical changes were easy to measure. Aurora Holdings' stock price had increased 30%, largely due to investor confidence in Maya's leadership during the crisis. SkyLink Airways had become the most respected airline in the industry for customer service and passenger rights. The company's discrimination complaint rate had dropped to 0, and customer satisfaction scores had reached industry-leading levels. But the personal cost had been more complex to calculate. Maya had become a public figure almost overnight. Her privacy evaporated in a blaze of media interviews, speaking engagements, and corporate consultations. She received hundreds of emails daily from people who had experienced discrimination, activists seeking her support, companies wanting her expertise, and occasionally people who disagreed with her methods or questioned her motives. The attention was both blessing and burden. Maya had never sought to be the face of airline accountability or corporate responsibility. She had simply wanted to assess customer service at a company she owned. Instead, she had become a symbol of how to fight discrimination with intelligence rather than anger, how to use power responsibly, and how to turn personal pain into public progress. On this particular afternoon, Maya was preparing for a video call with her grandmother, Dolores Rodriguez, the 83-year-old former civil rights activist who had raised Maya after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Dolores had been following the story from her apartment in Detroit, watching every interview and reading every article about her granddaughter's response to discrimination. Mija, Dolores said when her face appeared on Maya's laptop screen, "You look tired. Are you taking care of yourself in the middle of all this success?" Maya smiled at her grandmother's ability to see through corporate achievements to personal well-being. "I'm okay, abuela. Just processing everything that's happened. Tell me what's really on your mind. Not the business stuff, the human stuff." Maya was quiet for a moment, organizing thoughts she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. Abuela. I keep thinking about how much hatred Victoria Hammond had in her voice, how quickly the crew supported her discriminatory demands, how normal it seemed to them to treat me like I didn't belong somewhere. And how does that make you feel angry sometimes? Sad, definitely, but mostly lonely, I guess. Like, no matter how successful I become, there will always be people who look at me and see someone who doesn't belong in spaces I've earned the right to occupy. Dolores nodded with the understanding of someone who had fought similar battles 60 years earlier. "Baby, let me tell you something I learned during the sit-ins and freedom rides. The hatred you experienced wasn't really about you, it was about fear. Fear of what? Fear of change. Fear of losing status. Fear of admitting that the world they thought they understood isn't real. Victoria Hammond wasn't angry at you specifically, she was angry at what you represented. A young black woman who had achieved something she couldn't imagine achieving, sitting in a space she thought belonged to people like her. Maya considered this perspective. But knowing that doesn't make it hurt less. No, it doesn't. And you shouldn't pretend it doesn't hurt. But what you did with that hurt, that's what matters. You turned pain into purpose, prejudice into progress. That's what we've always had to do. Sometimes I wonder if anything has really changed, if people just got better at hiding their bias instead of actually overcoming it." Dolores leaned closer to her camera. "Mija, change doesn't happen because hearts change overnight. Change happens because behavior has consequences. You made discrimination expensive. You made bias visible. You showed that assumptions about who belongs where can be very, very wrong." Maya felt tears building in her eyes for the first time since the incident. She had been so focused on managing the crisis, implementing policy changes, and speaking at conferences that she hadn't allowed herself to process the emotional impact of being discriminated against so publicly and thoroughly. Abuela, what if I'd handled it wrong? What if I'd gotten angry and yelled at them? Then you would have been called an angry black woman and their discrimination would have been dismissed as justified response to your attitude, but you didn't give them that option. You stayed calm, asked reasonable questions, and let their own words reveal who they really were. It was hard to stay calm. Of course it was. That's what made it powerful. Anyone can lose their temper when they're being mistreated. It takes real strength to maintain dignity when people are trying to strip it from you. Maya wiped her eyes, feeling lighter for having admitted her emotional struggle to the one person who had taught her how to fight injustice with intelligence and grace. "What happens now, Abuela? How do I move forward without becoming cynical or bitter?" "You keep doing what you're doing. You use your platform to protect people who don't have platforms. You remember that your success creates opportunities for others who look like you. And you never forget that the goal isn't to make discrimination comfortable, it's to make it impossible. That evening, Maya made a decision that surprised even her closest advisors. She announced that Aurora Holdings would be establishing a passenger rights foundation with a $50 million initial endowment focused on providing legal support to travelers who experienced discrimination and couldn't fight back on their own. The transformation of the airline industry in the wake of the SkyLink Airways incident was unprecedented in scope and speed. Maya Rodriguez had become an inadvertent catalyst for changes that experts said would have taken decades to implement through traditional regulatory processes. 6 months after Victoria Hammond told her she didn't belong in first class, Maya stood before a congressional subcommittee on transportation and infrastructure testifying about passenger rights and corporate accountability in the aviation industry. The hearing room was packed with the journalists, industry executives, civil rights advocates, and passengers who had experienced discrimination on airlines across the country. Chairman Williams, committee members Maya, began her voice carrying the same calm authority that had characterized her response to discrimination at 30,000 feet 6 months ago. I experienced what millions of passengers experience every year: discrimination based on assumptions about who belongs in premium spaces and who doesn't. Committee Chairman Robert Williams, a Democrat from California, leaned forward with interest. Ms. Rodriguez, your response to that discrimination has been called everything from brilliant strategic communication to corporate virtue signaling. How would you characterize your actions? Chairman Williams, I would characterize my actions as documentation. I didn't create the discrimination, I revealed it. I didn't invent the bias, I exposed it. And I didn't solve the problem, I gave the industry tools to solve it themselves. Republican committee member Senator Sarah Chen from Texas asked Ms. Rodriguez, critics argue that your response was disproportionate to the offense. Was it really necessary to ground an entire aircraft and destroy multiple careers over what some people consider a misunderstanding? Maya's response was immediate and measured. Senator Chen, with respect, what happened wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern of discriminatory behavior supported by multiple crew members and escalated to threats of forced removal. The question isn't whether my response was proportionate, the question is whether discrimination should have consequences. But surely terminating employees for customer service failures, Senator, these weren't customer service failures. Customer service failures are slow drink service or uncomfortable seats. What I experienced were civil rights violations. When airline crew members threatened to remove passengers for asserting their legal rights, that's not customer service, that's discrimination under color of authority. Democratic committee member Congresswoman Lisa Martinez from New York nodded approvingly. Ms. Rodriguez, can you speak to the industry-wide changes that have resulted from your experience? Maya pulled out a folder thick with documentation. Congresswoman Martinez, the changes have been comprehensive. Every major airline has implemented enhanced anti-discrimination training. The FAA has updated passenger rights guidelines. The Department of Transportation has established new reporting requirements for discrimination complaints. What about measurable outcomes? Discrimination complaints across the industry have dropped 60%, largely because airlines are now proactively addressing bias rather than reactively managing incidents. Customer satisfaction scores for minority passengers have increased significantly. And perhaps most importantly, we're seeing more diverse hiring in flight crew positions as airlines recognize that diverse staff better serve diverse passengers. The hearing continued for 3 hours, with Maya fielding questions about corporate responsibility, federal regulations, social media accountability, and the balance between passenger rights and airline operations. Throughout it all, she maintained the same composed authority that had characterized her response to Victoria Hammond's abuse. But the most important validation came not from Congress but from passengers themselves. In the 6 months since the SkyLink incident, Maya had received over 10,000 messages from travelers who had experienced discrimination but had previously felt powerless to address it. One message stood out, Ms. Rodriguez. I'm a young Hispanic woman who was discriminated against on a flight to my grandmother's funeral last year. The crew made me move to economy, even though I had a first-class ticket because another passenger complained that I looked suspicious. I didn't know how to fight it, and I felt humiliated. When I saw how you handled your situation, I realized I had rights, and that discrimination isn't something I have to accept quietly. I filed a complaint with the DOT, and the airline not only apologized, but changed their policies. Thank you for showing us how to stand up with dignity. The airline industry had taken notice. Aurora Holdings had become the most respected transportation company in America, with other airlines actively seeking to partner with SkyLink Airways on passenger service initiatives. Maya had been invited to speak at every major industry conference, serve on federal advisory committees, and consult with international airlines on discrimination prevention. But perhaps the most meaningful change was cultural. The phrase SkyLink Standard had entered corporate vocabulary as shorthand for transparent immediate accountability when discrimination occurred. Business schools taught the incident as a case study in crisis management and ethical leadership. Diversity training programs used Maya's response as an example of how to document and address bias effectively. 1 year after the incident, Maya Rodriguez found herself back at JFK Terminal 4, preparing to board another flight. This time, she wasn't traveling incognito to test customer service. She was flying to London for the International Air Transport Association's annual conference, where she would be receiving an award for industry leadership and passenger advocacy. As she walked through the same terminal where her life had changed so dramatically, Maya reflected on the journey from victim of discrimination to symbol of accountability. The path hadn't been easy. The attention was still overwhelming. Sometimes the responsibility felt heavy, and the constant reminder of prejudice could be emotionally exhausting. But walking through the terminal, she noticed changes that made the burden worthwhile. A young black flight attendant helped an elderly Asian passenger with her luggage, their interaction marked by genuine respect and professionalism. A Hispanic family was being upgraded to business class by a gate agent who seemed genuinely excited to surprise them. A group of diverse passengers in first-class boarding were chatting comfortably, their presence in premium space appearing natural rather than noteworthy. At the gate, Maya was approached by a young black woman in her early 20s, dressed professionally and carrying a pilot's uniform bag. "Excuse me, are you Maya Rodriguez?" the woman asked nervously. Maya smiled. "I am, and you are Jasmine Thompson. I'm a first officer with Delta Airlines. I wanted to thank you. Thank me for showing us how to handle discrimination with dignity. I experienced something similar to what happened to you during my flight training instructors who assumed I didn't belong. Questions about whether I was qualified, comments about diversity hiring. I was ready to quit until I saw how you handled your situation. You showed me that the problem wasn't with me, it was with their assumptions. I filed a formal complaint, got the support I needed, and completed my training." Jasmine paused, emotion evident in her voice. "Miss Rodriguez, there are more women of color in pilot training programs now than there have been in decades. Airlines are actively recruiting diverse candidates because they realize that diverse crews serve diverse passengers better. You didn't just change your industry, you changed our possibilities." Maya felt tears building in her eyes. "Jasmine, you changed your own possibilities. I just documented what was already happening. You did the hard work of not letting discrimination stop your dreams. But you showed us how to fight back strategically instead of just enduring it quietly. That made all the difference." As Jasmine walked away to catch her own flight, Maya realized that this was the true measure of success, not the corporate awards or media attention, but the young people who no longer accepted discrimination as the price of pursuing their goals. Her own flight was called the first-class boarding for Aurora Holdings' owner, traveling in Suite 1A. As Maya approached the gate, the flight attendant smiled warmly. "Good morning, Miss Rodriguez. Welcome aboard. Is there anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable?" Maya smiled back, remembering a different flight attendant a year earlier who had assumed she was using a fraudulent ticket. "Just treat every passenger with the same respect you're showing me. Of course, ma'am, that's our standard." As Maya settled into Suite 1A, the same seat number where her ordeal had begun, she pulled out her phone to text Elena Santiago, who was managing Aurora Holdings operations, while Maya traveled to London. Boarding now. Suite 1A feels different this time. Elena's response was immediate. Because you changed what it means to sit there. Not just for you, but for everyone who comes after you. Maya looked around the first-class cabin as other passengers boarded. She saw business executives, families, young professionals, elderly couples, a diverse mix of people who belonged in this space because they had earned it, not because of their appearance or assumptions about their background. The flight attendant made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Aurora Flight 882 to London. We're honored to serve you today and committed to ensuring that every passenger experiences the respect and dignity you deserve. Maya smiled, knowing that those words, respect and dignity you deserve, weren't just corporate language. They were a promise that had been written in the aftermath of discrimination, tested in the crucible of public accountability, and implemented through the hard work of people who believed that change was possible. As the aircraft lifted off from JFK carrying Maya toward another speaking engagement about passenger rights and corporate responsibility, she thought about Victoria Hammond, Carlos Martinez, Jennifer Walsh, and Michael Torres, people whose prejudice had accidentally created a catalyst for industry-wide transformation. She didn't feel vindictive toward them anymore. She felt something closer to gratitude. Their discrimination had been real and painful, but their willingness to express it so openly and completely had given her the documentation she needed to demand change. They had intended to humiliate her, but instead, they had given her a platform to protect millions of future passengers from experiencing what she had experienced. Maya Rodriguez proved that day that character, not color, determines worth. Her quiet dignity in the face of hatred transformed an entire industry and showed millions that justice doesn't require revenge. It requires courage. The flight that was supposed to last 7 hours changed thousands of lives forever. Victoria Hammond learned too late that respect cannot be demanded, only earned. Her privilege couldn't protect her from the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, Maya turned her pain into progress, proving that our lowest moments can become our greatest opportunities to rise. If this story moved you, remember, we all have the power to stand up for what's right. Whether you're in Suite 1A or Seat 47B, your voice matters. Hit that subscribe button if you believe everyone deserves dignity, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to see more stories of justice and courage like this one, make sure you turn on notifications, because we're committed to sharing these important moments that remind us all of our shared humanity. Comment below and let me know what you thought of Maya's incredible response to discrimination. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Thanks for watching, and remember, you never know who you're really talking to. Sometimes the person others underestimate the most turns out to be the one with the power to change everything. Stay tuned for more amazing stories of courage and accountability, and we'll see you in the next video.